Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Hasti Soltani. I'm the Adult Programs Manager at MCA Denver, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Hyphen-American, a conversation series. Tonight's conversation kicks off a series of 3 of these talks inspired by Neri Ward, We the People, and it engages with some of the issues Ward addresses in his work, including immigration, belonging, and American identity. We have 2 wonderful moderators tonight, and I'm thrilled to introduce Naghem Swade and Dr. Taisha McMickens. Naghem Swade is a Cultural Exchange Services Coordinator at the Denver Public Library. Born in Basra, Iraq, she came to America as a refugee at the age of 7 and has been living in Denver ever since. In her spare time, she is writing a memoir about the struggles and perseverance of her family as they try to find refuge in a land that doesn't want them. Dr. Taisha McMickens earned a PhD in Communication Studies at the University of Denver. She is a critical intercultural communication educator whose work centers cross-cultural dialogue about identities, difference, and privilege and oppression. She has been independently consulting in the business sector, offering workshops on race and racism for 5 years, and has presented research at the National Communication Association throughout her career. Her scholarship lies at the intersection of Blackness, queerness, and media. Please join me in welcoming Naghem and Dr. Taisha. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hasti, for having us. All right, so shall we get started?
Yes.
All righty. So like Hasti introduced us, my name is Naghem Swade. I work at the Denver Public Library, and I'm super excited to, be part of this conversation.
Yes, it's a wonderful opportunity to have these discussions. They're so important, and like you, I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah.
So shall we begin?
Yeah, let's begin. Before we get started with our discussion and kind of reading the poem, we want to take a couple of minutes really to be very mindful and acknowledge the land that all of us are sitting on. And I just have a quick little statement that I want to read. We want to acknowledge that we are occupying Indigenous land. We acknowledge that 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to lands that make up the state of Colorado, and 109 contemporary tribal nations make up the land of California, which is where Taisha is at. And in Colorado, we acknowledge and honor the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute tribes, and all of the other original Indigenous peoples of the land which Colorado stands upon. We acknowledge the lives that have been and continue to be stolen, lives that were taken hundreds of years ago through Indigenous genocide and ethnic cleansing. And I want to say that this acknowledgement is more than just in taking in the words. It's me saying, and all of us saying, I see you, I hear you, and I will do my best to be better by you. This isn't simply an acknowledgement that this is stolen land taken from a people who have been inhumanely treated. But this is also to say that despite centuries of colonial theft and violence, this is still Indigenous land. It will always be Indigenous land. And Indigenous people are not relics of the past. They are still here. They continue to demonstrate their talents and gifts amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression, and that they are worth celebrating. And we try to lift up those voices and those experiences in almost every single thing that we do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so the piece of media we're going to be focusing on today is, and we both, I think, have a connection to this particular poem, and it's the bridge poem by Donna Kate Rushin, and it's really short. So I'm going to take another minute just to read this, and my apologies if I get emotional, because I always get emotional when I'm reading this poem. The bridge poem by Donna Kate Rushin, 1981. I've had enough. I'm sick of seeing and touching both sides of things, sick of being the damn bridge for everybody. Nobody can talk to anybody without me, right? I explain my mother to my father to my little sister to my brother to the white feminists to the black church folks to the ex-hippies to the black separatists to the artists to my friends' parents. And then I've got to I've got to explain myself to everybody. I do more translating than the goddamn UN. Forget it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of filling in your gaps. Sick of being your insurance against the isolation of your self-imposed limitations. Sick of being the crazy at your holiday dinners. Sick of being the odd one out at your Sunday brunches. Sick of being the sole Black friend to 34 individual white people. Find another connection to the rest of the world. Find something else to make you legitimate. Find some other way to be political and hip. I will not be the bridge to your womanhood, your manhood, your humanness. I'm sick of reminding you to not close off too tight for too long. I'm sick of mediating with your worst self on behalf of your better selves. I am sick of having to remind you to breathe. Just breathe before you suffocate your own full self. Forget it. Stretch or drown. Evolve or die. The bridge I must be is the bridge to my own power. I must translate my own fears, mediate my own weaknesses. I must be the bridge to nowhere but my true self. And then I will be useful. And this is one of my favorite poems. Makes me cry every time I read it.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Have to breathe after that.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath. So should we start with some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So one of the questions we wanted to dive into, and Naghem, you could probably take the lead on this one. It's why did you choose this this piece of media? And I think you've sort of touched on that, but if you can expand, right, a little bit.
Yeah. So I touched on this a little bit, kind of in my bio. Mm-hmm. I was not born in America. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And so when I came to the US, I was 7. And by the age of 9, I had a younger brother who was born here in America. But by 9, I was this adult. And I was the world translator for my parents. Going to doctor's appointments and prescriptions and, talking to the police if something came up or talking to the school. And by 9, I knew how to write a check and I knew how to navigate all of those things. I had my dad's social security number memorized. I had his bank account memorized, and that responsibility just increased. As I got older, it's like, all right, just adding more stuff. And it just felt normal because that was the expectations. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. And my parents were very afraid of stepping outside and going into, the real world because they were afraid that somehow they would lose themselves and lose their identity. So they made me into this like mini soldier who had to fight all of those battles. And I did my undergrad in CU Boulder, and predominantly white. I was pre-med. I was so close to dropping out. And then I took an elective class, and we were reading works by Gloria Anzaldúa, and we were reading a book titled "This Bridge Called My Back." And I saw this poem, and I was like, "Wait, no, this is me! Like, oh my God, I'm not the only person who's experiencing this. I'm not alone." And this came from, this poem was by a black activist, and I was like, "Yeah, we might be like in different worlds, but somehow our worlds collided."
Yeah. I think that's similar to my experience and entry point into Gloria Anzaldúa's work was in college. I had a really wonderful mentor who enjoyed the works of Anzaldúa, and we talked about critical sexuality studies because it was in this class that we were thinking through queerness, and we were thinking through Latinx experiences on the border, which has multiple meanings, right? And so we were thinking of how these people, what tools were they using for survival, and what they were met through, and what they were. So we're really unpacking those experiences, and so that really spoke to me because of my own experiences with queerness, right? With being a Black woman in academia, with speaking this sort of acceptable or palatable type of English, and surprising people. You've heard of the stereotype of being articulate, right? And so that puts you in these, and that's kind of a similarity. You're put in these precarious situations where you're expected to represent different strands of being, right?
Right.
And so it was really something that really touched me, and something that started making me think of where I belong sort of in this space as an academic, as a Black person, as a queer person, et cetera. And so sort of at the intersection of that, what's the space that I'm carving out for myself, right? Where do I exist? Where do I find peace and healing, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, the longest time, when I thought of space, I thought of physical space, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can see me right now. I am a Muslim. I wear a hijab.
Mm-hmm.
And being in the United States was very, very difficult, particularly after 9/11. That was some of the hardest years that I've been through. And this is another hard year that I've been through. But my parents took us, when I say us, I mean my siblings, and took us back to Iraq, and I think in 2006, and then again in 2014. And I didn't belong there either. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was just like, oh my God, what is this? And, here in the United States, one of that core gut assumptions is terrorist, you don't belong here. Or if
Mm-hmm.
you're somehow one of the good ones, because you wear a hijab, you're oppressed, therefore I have to save you. And then back home in Iraq, that narrative was, well, you are sitting in a chair of privilege and glory, and you're somehow a traitor to your people, and you're a traitor to your culture, and you're a traitor to your religion. And that's a lot to take on as a 21 or 20-year-old, however old I was. And
Yeah.
so I really found connection with Gloria Anzaldúa and her concept of the mestiza consciousness, that third space of that borderlands.
Right.
And
Right.
it's occupying this mental space, right, that you carve out for yourself, where
Right.
where all of your identity and how they intersect are able to thrive in this space.
Right. So you're not forced to actually pick and choose which identity to bring to work, bring to display at home, to display among friends, et cetera. I think that's important.
Yeah.
What you said really.
Go
I
ahead.
couldn't hear you. You're choppy. Go ahead.
Oh, I felt like something when you said masks, it really clicked with me, because I do have very different masks when I am in the Western world, if you will, in that professional sphere. Even my name, I introduce myself as Naghem, but at home in spaces where I am with my community members, I introduce myself as Naghem, and that's the Arabic way of saying my name, Naghem, and so. Masks on and off all day long.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said that, because when you were talking, you actually reminded me of something as well, and that is it ties into, I don't know if you're familiar with Bell Hook's work on the home place, and how it's very necessary for people to have a home, right? You can have conversations that are very salient racially or in terms of sex and gender. You can have these conversations with like-minded individuals, right? Free of threat and violence, and maybe sometimes free of having to educate others who don't know, right?
Yeah.
Which deters from actually using the space to talk through issues, because now it turns into an educating space, right?
Yeah.
But you reminded me of this of something when you said switching, right? And talking about language. And I want us to really think through how white supremacy sort of makes and dictates these demands on language, and demand on who you present yourself to, right? To be just considered human, not to be dehumanized. Okay. And it really hits home to me, because once I started, I would say junior high school, there was I lived in an all Black enclave, and I went to an all Black school, but the program inside of my school that I was a part of was primarily full of white children who were bussed in, because it was a gifted program, right? I was one of maybe two people in that program. And that really does something to you, because all of your friends then are these people, but when you go home to the folks in your neighborhood who now see you as other as well, right? Because you're maybe trying to be white, or you sound to them white. So they come to associate standard English with whiteness.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you use in our neighborhood. That's something that you use on the job, et cetera. So there's been discussions about this, but you never really have sort of a home place, right? Because in the academy, you're accepted for your intelligence, you're articulate, et cetera, but you're still susceptible to racial microaggressions. You're right. There's questions about your hair, questions about what you eat, how you smell, blah, blah, blah. And so it's really important that we kind of think through what's the underlying cause of all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we peel back all these layers about mestiza consciousness and why we need a third space, why we need home place, and why all of these wonderful scholars of color are talking about the fact that Black and brown people need to carve out different spaces to just breathe and exist, that's really important for us to think through, right? And to talk about.
Yeah. And when you said, even my siblings, so 6 kids, that's a lot of kids. And that's like very different personalities. And my siblings have always told me that I was the white sibling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the way I speak, because of the way I present myself, apparently just speaking proper grammar is considered white, and that I'm trying too hard. And that was, my parents celebrated that. They're like, yes, for you to survive, this is what you have to do. And they didn't really question why I had to put on this show or why I had to switch. To them, it was just like, if you want to survive and you want to be successful here in the United States, straight A student, speaking perfect English, yes sir, no ma'am, thank you, all of those manners. And the number one thing I remember my dad telling me is, you can't be political, because if you're political, they're gonna. And I was like, wait, but at this point in our conversation, we had already become naturalized, right? So we had already become Americans, and I'm quote unquoting. And I was like, but we're Americans. And I swear to God, this is what he told me. He's like, Baba. He was like, no. He was like, this is a piece of paper. God forbid something happens. We are always seen as the enemy. Right. And it goes back to your question that you presented of white supremacy and the traits of white supremacy and how they came to be. And the thing is, I feel like America, there were indigenous communities and indigenous people here, when America was founded, and through ethnic cleansing and through genocide, completely destroyed. And the idea behind America was these systems were created, I feel like, for white people.
Right.
Because and right now, what we're seeing in the world and what we're seeing here in the nation, and just how hard it is for people to have a simple conversation, is because that perspective isn't there. How do you talk to someone who's never seen racial discrimination in their life before? To them, it doesn't exist. Right. So we're calling out these traits of white supremacy, and we're calling out the sense of belonging, when these systems and this place was never created for people of color. It was never created for my hijab. Right. It was never created for this. And now we're trying to carve out that space when the space was never meant to be for us.
Right. Absolutely.
So.
And I mean, that's where this Hyphen-American thing comes, right? Because you're never going to just be American if you are not, if you're Black or brown, right? You've got to have that hyphen. And so that's interesting.
Yeah, if it doesn't have a hyphen, it's the default. And in this society, what is the default? The default is automatically white. Right. If I tell someone I'm an American, they're like, "But where are you from?"
Right.
But I'm an American.
Yes, and we were talking through this notion of being a perpetual foreigner, right? It doesn't matter if you were born here and you're brown, right? And people are going to ask you things about your background, and then if you say, "I'm from Colorado," and they say, "Well, where are you really from?" Right? As if there's this disbelief that you could ever be from Colorado, family from Colorado, et cetera, right? And I think that's part of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
is that only certain people, certain bodies get to be considered American by default, right?
There's that reminder that no matter, I guess, the high level of your grammar or the way you speak or however you present yourself, that you're always a foreigner.
Yes.
You're always a foreigner. And I also want to tie this in, I think, with there's another narrative that ties closely with that perpetual foreigner. And it's that model minority myth, right? And it's the myth that the only good immigrant or the only good minority are those who follow the rules. And I don't know what that follow the rules. There's like a lot of definitions for what follow the rules is. It's like, what do you mean by that? Can I question that? So someone who's not going to question, someone who's not going to speak up, and someone who isn't, going to cause a ruckus or make problems or defend themselves or any of that. And I think that's what my dad meant when he was like, don't be political. He was like, because they're going to kick you out. And to him, being political meant speaking up. Being political meant actually being loud and occupying a space that is for predominantly, white bodies. And so, when I told him, I was like, Dad, these are the classes I'm taking. I think he had a heart attack. He was like, what? No. He was like, you're pre-med. I told you, don't be political. I was like, you don't get it. Being in the United States and wearing a hijab is one of the biggest political moves you can do. Yeah.
And I think that's the pervasiveness of being in a society where white supremacy is embedded in every aspect of the social sphere, right? It's that it's a myth to think, and we're seeing this in social movements right now, right? It's a myth to think that you will gain as a Black or brown person any more respect if you are calm and quiet than if you are out protesting and screaming at the top of your lungs, because your brown and Black skin does not prevent you from the violences that are embedded in this country, right?
Right.
And so to speak well, to get a job, and to so-called do all the steps that you need to do to be afforded peace and humanity, that, like you said, it was never something that we had access to, but it was something that we were told and socialized to seek. Yeah. Right. And so it's not a surprise to hear, your parents, because my mom too, it's not a surprise to hear that your dad wanted you to behave and move through spaces in a particular way. I think what's really important is they wanted us to survive. They wanted us to live, because they knew that should we not behave in those ways, that we might be harmed. Right. And that's kind of the conversation that's happening now in social movements with Black Lives Matter, right? Is that you're not doing it right. You're too loud. You're shouting and you're causing a ruckus, and right. But then if you look at other social movements that were much more peaceful, where you sat on the ground and literally chain linked arms, right, and sang songs and hymns and things, that was also wrong. And so this conversation really should just be like, you don't want us to do anything that rattles the cage because you want us to be these respectable Black and brown folks. And what you're missing in that is that you are part of the problem, right? You are the reason that white supremacist structures are so pervasive, right? Because at the end of the day, if anybody's child is harmed or killed, you are going to act out in ways that we don't know how, right? You might be the quiet type, you might be the type to flip tables, you might be the type to avoid everyone, but we should not be dictating those behaviors, right? Right. And also it just makes Black and brown people seem like we're very monolithic.
Yeah.
Right?
That diaspora.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, I was like, really? My perspective is my perspective and my experiences alone. You will never find someone who has gone through the same exact steps that I have gone in, right? But apparently I am the same to you as, as another, like, did you know, at work, there was another Muslim colleague of mine, and our supervisors got our name mixed up all the time. So I'm sitting down right now, but I'm short. I'm like 5'2".
Uh-huh.
And my colleague Fadumo was almost 6 feet. And the fact that she was a couple of shades darker than I was. I got called Fadumo so many times. And I was like, are you serious with this? Like, really? Naghem, Fadumo, 6 feet, 5 feet? Like, you can't tell the difference?
Can't tell
Is
the
that
difference.
how it is? Is that how it is? And it's just being here in the United States and belonging. It's unfortunate to say, I don't belong. I don't feel like I belong. I should belong. I should feel like I belong, and this is a safe space for me. The last time I felt a sense of belonging was before 9/11, and that was I was in 6th grade.
Okay.
I was in 6th grade, and it was middle school. Man, middle school is tough, regardless of whatever political climate or atrocities are going worldwide. It's just like, okay. But I was that straight A student. I was a good friend. I helped kids with their homework, and within an hour, everything shifted. I was now Osama bin Laden's daughter, and apparently I had like a bomb under my hijab, and it goes back to that, like, I will never belong, no matter how much I walk the walk or how much I try to assimilate to this culture.
Right.
Until, I can't take off my skin. I refuse to take off my hijab.
Yeah.
And the reality is, being American is being white, being Christian, being cisgender, being all of those normal traits of white supremacy, of like that dominant culture.
Right.
So.
And that's why I think it's really important to have and carve out spaces like these where we can share our lived experiences. Also to do that in schools, in homes, in every sector of our lives, because we really need to debunk this myth that there is a perfect American, right? And that we really need, and part of that for me is disrupting whiteness, right? And how that is so dominating, and how that is the standard in which that we should all achieve any sort of peace and greatness in this country, is to aim for those levels and standards of whiteness. And whiteness is elusive, for one thing, right? It's like, it's both there, but it's also elusive. I feel like when Black people, for example, subscribe to some sort of respectability politics in which you need to carry yourself in a particular way, it's never, you're always kind of striving for it, but you're never going to reach it. Yeah. And so I gave up on respectability politics a long time ago. There's no way for me to, I'm about to go on a rant here.
Do it. Go on a rant. This is a space for it, I think.
But I need to be able to exist in a space in which I feel valued, right? And respected. And that's not going to look like, oh, we'll do everything we say as white privileged folks are demanding, right?
Yeah.
Of you. And so I think that's just, I'm avoiding going off on the rant right now. Save it for a later question.
Yeah, you said something that just kind of clicked in my head. And have you heard of the theory of the guest covenant?
Ooh, tell me more.
And so the idea behind the guest covenant is, all right, so I'm going to say we as a collective, as Americans, we are the hosts, right? And we are opening our home to, and this particularly applies to immigrants and refugees. And we're opening our homes to immigrants and refugees. We're saving them from the atrocities of the world. And there are atrocities of the world, but that's not the only defining things of immigrants and refugees. But since I am the host, I dictate how you act, how you behave, and how you just basically live in the space. And if you do one thing that I don't agree with, I have a right as the host to kick you out.
Okay.
Right? So, but it's different because culturally speaking, like the Iraqi culture, and I would even take it a step further and say the Muslim narrative is you're supposed to treat your guests better than you treat yourselves.
Okay.
Right. And so when I first heard about that, the idea of the guest covenant, I was like, yeah, it makes sense because it ties hand in hand with the perpetual foreigner and, that model minority of like, okay, we are doing good onto you, onto your body. We're saving you, right? We are being gracious hosts, and we're allowing you in this space, but we're going to tell you how to behave. We're going to tell you, erase your culture, erase your identity, erase your religion, because it doesn't fit in with who we are. It doesn't fit in as Americans, because you are savage and we need to civilize you. We need to save you, right? And if you do one thing that we don't agree with, you're out. We don't like you. You're bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're always caught in this, and it's funny because you're always caught in this sort of limbo between the narrative that America is a melting pot. And then you're like, oh, but if you stepped out of the pot, then you're not a part of the melting pot, you know, or you don't belong.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. Do you want a melting pot where like all of the ingredients come together to create like this brown mush and you can't tell you can't tell the ingredients and you can't tell? I'd like to think of it as like a salad bowl or an oatmeal, right? All of the ingredients are coming together. They hold their shape, and they contribute to that narrative of what a salad tastes like. I'm hungry, so that's why I was like, salad bowl.
When you said oatmeal holding its shape, I was like, what kind of oatmeal are you eating?
Oh, sorry. I meant omelet.
What did you say? No, I'm just giving you a hard time. I get it. No, I don't actually believe in melting pot. I don't believe that that we are this big blend, because it's a universalist idea, right? It's like this idea that we're all the same. And like you said, we can't see the salad from the onions, from the tomatoes, from whatever else you put in your salads. And so instead it's just like we're trying to erase people.
Yes.
When we do that. And so, no, I don't believe in that. I think that I want all of those things. Like you said, I want to be able to taste what the tomato tastes like, it tastes what the onion tastes like, and all that kind of stuff. And so how that translates to identities is I want to be able to see you and honor you for your identity. I don't want to look at you as a Latinx person, for example, or a Irish person, for example, and erase who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I want to see you because you're probably proud of your own self and who you are and different aspects of your identity, and rightfully so, right? And so for me to say, well, we're all the same in this big old salad bowl I'm carrying, it's complete erasure. Yeah. So no, I don't think of that. But I do think that some people just won't make it into the salad bowl anyway into that, right? The Hyphen-Americans will not.
No, you have to be I have nothing against kale, but you have to be like organic, freshly cut green kale.
It's going to be a whole conversation about salad, and I love it.
Yeah. And you know what the melting pot reminds me of, and I know I'm like going completely off our outline in our discussion. It goes back to, I think it goes back to the saying of like when you talk to a person, they're like, well, I don't see color, I don't see race. I was like, no, you should see color, and you should see race, and you should value my experience, my perspective, and my identity. What you shouldn't do is say that it's not worth it, or try to use your privilege and your authority to degrade me.
Right. You know what's interesting is I did this experiment. Well, I was homeschooling my two children. They were elementary school aged. And one of the activities to teach them about difference was to take 2 brown eggs, raw eggs, and crack them open. And they both had the same ingredient, the same yellow yolk spill out, right? And so it's trying to show them, oh, we're all the same on the inside. And I was just floored by that. It got so many likes. It's viral. It was shared everywhere. And there was a part of me that was like, oh, that's a really interesting entry point into talking about difference. But again, it's this universal, like we're all the same. I'm going to erase your brown skin on the outside. So I take it to my college students and I'm talking to them and I'm like, we debrief 10 minutes before class starts, usually if they're there. And so we're just chit-chatting off the cuff. And I take it to them and I'm like, and they had this activity and I think it's really problematic. And my students said, what's wrong with that? Now I'm teaching them about race and racism. So clearly I had to backtrack. They're like, that's such a cute idea. It's so clever. It's not. The problem is that by me taking that brown eggshell off and discarding it, I discarded so much of your identity, your heritage, your culture, right? Things that were passed down to you, things that you were proud of, in favor of a yellow, runny yolk, right? Just so that I could be like my neighbor, they could be like me, etc., and we're all the same. But we're not. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I told them that. They said, well, what's wrong with it? I said, well, instead of erasing differences, we should be celebrating differences. And so I think that it goes, and it all kind of blends back together. I know you said we're off topic. We're not. We're all of this blends together in sort of keeping this divide of, right, of who is the object and who's the subject, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And this is unfortunate, who's the owner and who's the owned, right? There's always that hierarchy, who's the civilized and who's the savage, who has more value and who needs to be fixed, and just why.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the relationship between, this is just going to move us forward, what's the relationship between intersectionality and belonging? Do you want to start that, or do you want me to start, or do you want to start with that one?
Do you want to, let me jump in. Go ahead and start, and I'll think about it. I'll activate my brain powers.
I was thinking about this question in terms of belonging in the US and intersectionality because I belong to a lot of Black activist groups in social media, right, across social media. And so now that the protests are going on, and this was at the height of the protests for Black Lives Matter, there were a couple of deaths of trans Black women. And when activists would try to uplift their stories and to seek justice for them, they were met with a barrage of, we don't have time to deal with trans people. Let the gay community or let the LGBT community deal with those murders and those deaths. And so I was thinking, these people are out here marching for Black lives alongside of their cisgender brothers and sisters. And yet they are being further ostracized and devalued and degraded in their death because of who they are. And it made me feel clearly I was livid, right? Because we are one of the problems, I think, too, and this goes back to whiteness, and this is also in the Black Lives Matter movement, is that we are not monolithic, right? We have intersectional identities. And so what upset me was because it happens with just queerness in general too, right? In some spaces where you get pushed to the side, it's not your time. Only a certain organization can fight for your humanity, not us. Yeah. And so it made me think of a couple things, like these people are acting like there are not Black queer people, Black trans folks, right? And they're also acting like these folks are not also fighting for their lives because they also experience police violence and et cetera. And so I was really kind of thinking through intersectionality and belonging within groups and then in the larger, systems.
Yeah. And I've noticed this, that I think in a lot of advocacy spaces, and it's almost like the oppression Olympics of who's been oppressed the most, so who gets that loudest voice. And that's really unfortunate because we all have intersecting identities. Right. And we have to, God, what's the word I'm looking for? We have to honor those intersecting identities, right? And give voice to them. Because if we are quieting one part of our identity in order for another to emerge, we ourselves are internalizing and doing supremacist work to that identity, I feel like. Right. So if we want to evolve and move forward as a community, we move forward with our intersectionalities and we move forward with our differences and we respect them. Right. And it's and we move forward together.
right? If I'm out here fighting for my rights, I'm also fighting for yours, right? Because I know that you have experiences too, right? I'm not just out here for myself. I'm fighting for everyone oppressed, right? And so I think that gets lost in the message because people just get focused on these little semantics of, like you said, Black in the Lives Matter. And so it's like, look, if I'm fighting for police brutality and we get a law on the books that does something to reverse, it's for everybody, right?
It's for everybody.
And so you can't scream that loud enough because you have so many people just in the minutia of all the, you need to say my name too, or something. I don't know.
And it's we should say it's I'm not fighting for my rights. I'm fighting for our rights.
Right. Exactly. Right? Exactly.
And so my way of thinking and my philosophy is, and I'm not saying this because a lot of people, when I'm in these spaces, I have a lot of people who oppose what I say and who actually just oppose me being in this space. But if I see someone speaking out against that person, I was like, here's the deal. I was like, I don't agree with you. I might not agree with every single thing you say, but I respect the human in you, right? I respect your differences. Absolutely. So I will always fight for that. I will always fight for your true human to come, to thrive. And it feels like in these spaces, you can only be one part of yourself. You can't be, unfortunately, you can't be all of yourself. There are identities of yourself that you have to, in order to survive, in order to work, in order to get paid, so you have money to live and eat. I'm going to play a role. Right. Yeah. And that's suffocating. That is really suffocating because it's like I am killing a part of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. To save another part.
And how is that fair? How is that okay? How is that freedom? I don't know why I said freedom, because apparently America equals freedom when freedom is supposed to be worldwide. It's not supposed to belong only to America.
Well, Americans can't even agree on freedom for people. I mean, we're fighting for freedom, and then you have people protesting that. Like, how does that make sense? It doesn't. So, so do you ever feel like, and this is one of the questions, do you ever feel like you belong in the United States?
Am I going to get kicked out of the U.S. if I say no?
No, because
this is my very sarcastic self coming out, and that is a form of resiliency for me. Just being sarcastic and making jokes, and that's how I survive.
Yes.
If you've noticed me talking about Iraq, I call it home.
Right.
And maybe I have a romanticized notion of Iraq because I left Iraq when I was 7. That was 24 years ago? I don't know how old I am. It was a long time ago.
Somewhere back then.
It was somewhere back then because there's still a little kid in me who remembers walking down the street and people smiling at them and not looking at them as they were Chicken Little, the sky is falling type thing.
Okay.
Right. And when I put on my hijab, when I get ready to go outside, I have conversations with myself, and it's really like boot camp. And what I'm doing is I'm preparing myself mentally, spiritually, physically, of if a racist person were to do this or were to say this, how am I going to react? And so I am always in that fight and flight mode of all right, this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to do. Particularly if there's an attack, a terrorist attack or whatever. I have these million scenarios playing in my head, preparing myself of how I'm going to react if a person does something, if a person wants to pull off my scarf, if a person tells me again to burn the scarf and go back home, right? Yeah. And this is like preaching to the choir. I am so exhausted, right? And belonging, if you belong in a place, you don't have to go through that exhaustion. You don't have to put on these scenarios. You don't have to go through a mental boot camp every single time you step outside the home.
Right.
And no, I don't feel like I belong in the United States.
Well, some people do feel free. I know that I had this conversation in one of my dialogue classes about identities, about the thought of how do you prepare to leave your home?
Yeah.
And so I just get my shorts on and go out, get my shorts, my shirt, and then I go outside. And it's like, well, I think about things like, is it dark outside? What is the population of the demographic of the neighborhood I'm in?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is my car, do all my taillights work? Are my tags up to date on the car? Because I don't want any excuse to get pulled over. And so some of us have the privilege of not having to worry about those things. We get in our car, we go somewhere, and we just enjoy, our friends when we get there. Or we run the errand and then we come back home. Others of us, like yourself and like me, have a script playing about safety.
Yeah.
Right? Because we know that at any moment, if it were just at the wrong place at the wrong time, something can happen.
Yeah.
And I feel that both as a queer person, as a woman, and as a Black person.
Yeah.
So at the intersection of those identities, it's a compounded sort of fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That has now become like normalized. It's just something that I just think of. It's not something I need to share or hyperventilate over, but it's just there constantly.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
when people see me, they see, they see a Muslim and all of that assumptions. And they see a woman. And I have a whole bunch of people trying to save me from myself.
Yeah. Well, we get go back to Africa. You get go back to Iran. And so it's, look, I'm older than you and your parents. I don't need you to tell me where to go, right? Like, stop.
I wish people were smart enough to know where I'm from. They just tell me to go back to my country.
Oh, go back, yeah.
Because they're like,
Black kid is always going to be somewhere in Africa.
Yeah. Quite honestly, people don't know the difference between a lot of people. I'm not going to say as a collective.
Right.
A lot of people don't know. They just know you're from over there. You're a bunch of terrorists. You're going to kill us all. You want to convert us all into Muslims. I was like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that until we can get past those sentiments, it's not going to be, we are still going to need these third spaces, right? Until we can dismantle these structures of white supremacy, we're always going to need these third spaces. And those are protective spaces. Those are spaces that can, like at a corporate job, that would mean that we need affinity groups, right? That we would need to have those spaces for Black and brown folks to just let their hair down, just to breathe, right? And no, my white peers and my white boss are not invited into that space, right? So, so it doesn't look like we have questions.
Yeah, we've been just talking.
If you want to ask us questions, please ask questions in the chat box and we will get to those. Because we are just talking about these lived experiences, these rich lived experiences that oftentimes are silenced in discussions. So please ask us some questions if you have questions about the poem, about any of the terms that we threw out.
Yeah. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for those questions, I think a big shout out to the Museum of Contemporary Art for being brave, I think, and creating this space and having this conversation. Because that's, I think, one of the first steps. It's not the only step, but it's one of the first steps of what we can do together to move forward, is to have these uncomfortable conversations. And
Right. To my surprise, I taught at a predominantly white institution for the first time past 4 or 5 years ago. And some of my students hadn't met a person of color until college. And so it is very important to engage and talk with one another and just sort of help walk through debunking some myths and stereotypes, and even this conversation about belonging and being a Hyphen-American is really, to me, very powerful to hold space for.
Yeah. And it's not just a one-time thing having these conversations, or it's a one-time thing of reading like an anti-racist book or whatever it is. It's really a lifelong journey of self-reflection and just learning. And I encourage, and it's a really scary thing to do, being vulnerable. But I think this is this is how we save ourselves, and this is how we move forward. And it's just knowing we're going to get it wrong, knowing how to apologize when we get it wrong, and making a commitment to learning about others.
Yeah. And I think that's important. As we end this, we talked about allyship. Yeah. And we talked about what that looks like. Do you want to say more about that? So I think you had some really deep thoughts about allyship. And
yeah. Allyship, I think, starts with the individual person first, and asking why, they're doing the work that they're doing. And I'm at a space right now personally where I'm having a really hard time differentiating between allyship and white saviorism, just because of the personal experiences that I've gone through. And I think to dismantle, if our goal, and I hope it's everyone's goal, I don't think it's everyone's goal yet, but if we want to dismantle white supremacy, if we want to create a new structure that fits for everyone, we have to do a lot of personal self-reflection of, why are we doing the work that we're doing? And what are our biases and assumptions that we have going into this work?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I've had a lot of good intentioned white friends who tried to save me and who are like, no, you're doing this wrong. Or when we're in spaces together, their voice tries to overpower my voice. And really it's not a competition of voices. It's, reaffirming and affirming and validating those voices.
Right. So. And that happens when you listen. Sit back and listen.
Actively.
I think, actively listen. I was talking to you about that the other day, about allyship and how we need to move the conversation forward toward you just being anti-racist. Like, people just need to be anti-racist. You don't need to have allyship become something that you wear and something that you can get a degree in. And it just has to be part of who you are. It has to be part of your daily being and your daily walk through life. Yeah. And so for me, I'm really interested in moving the conversation away from allyship and toward just plain good old fashioned anti-racism. Just be anti-racist, period. Right. So I think, and I think that's really good for us to start thinking through as we have allies. I think we do need allies, but I also think we need people who just understand that that's not where it ends. Like, it doesn't end in you just reading a couple books, right? It's lifelong and constant. And that's for us too. Like, I need to, there are identities that I need to work through, right? And stand up for more, and et cetera.
Likewise. And I think, we as humans, we as a species are very complex individuals who evolve and grow. And if we can have a learning model that matches our nature, we're going to evolve and grow. And I may know something in 5 days that I don't know today. Right. And that's something that I learned in the next 5 days is going to help me become a better person and a better friend, right? A more decent friend. So I'm hoping I'm humble enough to say, yep, 5 days ago, I was wrong. I'm going to be better. I'm going to try to do better and work towards that. Yeah.
Your parents used to say, treat others how you want to be treated. They were actually right.
Yeah.
They were right. Do that. Yeah. So again, thank you for having me on. I loved co-hosting with you. I would do it anytime, hands down. Because I just love these conversations. Yeah. And I really think that they're really powerful and needed.
Absolutely. And I think this is our third or fourth trial run. And every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So I was
so it looks like we didn't get many questions. Yeah. And so we are do you have any final thoughts?
No, just thank you. Thank you, Taisha, for sharing the space with me. I really appreciate you. And I look forward to, to our friendship and what that looks like in the future. Yes. And thank you to Hatsi and the museum for inviting us on. And I'm looking at the comments and I really love the support. So thank you to everyone out there putting this out in the world for joining this space and, just joining us in our conversation.
Yes. Someone said, "We Wear the Mask," a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Yeah.
And so that's another educational piece.
I'm going to write that
down. It's an educational piece for us too. Yep. We Wear the Mask, a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar. And we have more coming in. Thank you so much for all the wonderful comments, and for just being a part of it, because this is really how we move the needle, right? We need everyone to come together and understand that you are valued, that your voice is important, right? That your lived experiences are important. It's not something that I'm sharing this lived experience and then you follow up with but that didn't happen to my other Black friend or my other Iranian friend. No, it's right. And that's a lot of times what happens. Just be open-minded, just listen. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So thank you all. This I like seeing the thank yous. This was great.
I know. You know, I'm saying thank you because I don't know how to leave.
Thank you. You're just here. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone, or good morning.
Have a good evening.
Depending
See you.
on where you're at in the world.
Bye.